13.
Welcome to our virtual First Unitarian Church service. I'm Nikki Miller, your service associate and music minister.
I'm David Strickler, commissioned lay minister for this congregation.
I am double checking our announcements. That's the one thing I'm not certain I have. Our Mother's Day flower sale
Ends today.
ends today. My goodness! So if you'd like to send that order in, Oh, and we will have virtual coffee hour afterwards. We're going to try it on Zoom, so please check the FYI. Look at that. You can also look at the Zoom password here and the Zoom account. We'll give the number again at the end.
So today, I have these opening words from Gretchen Haley. What's going to happen? Will everything be okay? What can I do? In these days, we find ourselves too often stuck with these questions on repeat. What's going to happen? Will everything be okay? What can I do? We grasp at signs and markers, articles of news and analysis, Facebook memes and forwarded emails, as if the new zodiac, capable of forecasting all that life may yet bring our way, as if we could prepare, as if life had ever made any promises of making sense or turning out the way we thought. As if we are not also actors in this still unfolding story. For this hour, we gather to surrender to the mystery, to release ourselves from the needing to know, the yearning to have it all figured out, and also the burden of believing we either have all the control or none. Here in our song and our silence, our stories and our sharing, we make space for a new breath, a new healing, a new possibility. To take root, that is courage, forged in the fire of our coming together, and felt in the spirit that comes alive in this act of faith, that we believe still the new world is possible, that we are creating it already, here and now. Come, let us worship together.
The chalice lighting today is The End is the Beginning by Katie Gaffney. We call forth the light of our faith by igniting our chalice. This spark of new beginnings invites us into the sacred space to reflect where we have been and where we are going. Even knowing that this particular flame will intentionally end with our ritual extinguishing, we fear not its end. For we know, with brave hearts, that from every ending of our lives, we are sent forth to make a new beginning. Now please join me in our covenant. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Please join us in our first song this morning, hymn number 113, Where is Our Holy Church? Mickey will do this. Our story this morning for the children is a folk tale from Vietnam about a toad. The story is entitled The Rain King. Once upon a time in Vietnam, rain did not fall for many months. All the creatures worried that drought could destroy the earth and all those who lived upon it. A toad who lived near a pond dug a hole deep in the mud. The pond grew shallower each day, and in his hole he could hide from the warmth of the sun. As the weeks passed with no sign of rain, the toad's mud hole began to dry out. He knew that he would not survive if the world dried out. So he decided that he needed to speak to the Queen of Heaven and beg her to send rain. When the other animals heard of this plan, they laughed. You're only a toad. The Queen of Heaven is too important to talk to you. But the toad just popped out of his mud hole and set off on his journey. He followed the river, and when he reached a bend in the river, he noticed a swarm of bees searching for nectar in a field of withering flowers. I'm going to the Queen of Heaven to beg for rain, he croaked. Would you like to join me? The bees hovered over his head, considering his offer. If our flowers die, we'll die too, they buzzed. They agreed to join the toad. Before long, they came upon a thin rooster who moaned, the rice paddies are dry, and the farmers refuse to feed us. Soon they'll have no food, even to feed themselves. Come with us, the bees buzzed. We're going to ask the Queen of Heaven to send rain. What can it hurt, the rooster thought. So he joined them, and the crew of animals traveled on. Everywhere they walked, they passed animals suffering from hunger and thirst, but they gained strength as their numbers grew. We will save the world, they told them. At the foot of the mountains, the group came across a panting tiger. I'm dying of thirst. Well, come with us to the Queen of Heaven, the rooster crowed. We're going to ask her to send rain. Why not? The tiger said. So he joined the group too. Up and up they climbed, the bees flying ahead. When they reached the highest peak, the tiger turned to the toad and the rooster and said, hop on my back. And so they did. Then, with all his strength, the tiger leaped toward the nearest cloud. The bees flew along beside him. From cloud to cloud they leaped, higher and higher. At last, they reached the gates of heaven. We made it, the rooster crowed. All together, they made their way through the gates, the toad hopping ahead, and the toad landed right at the queen's feet. Your Majesty, look down here.
When the queen saw the warty toad, the scruffy tiger, the skinny rooster, and the wild bees, she cried out to her guards, capture these intruders.
The toad turned and hopped as fast as he could toward the gates, crying for help, and the bees at once went to work, stinging the guards all over. howling with pain. The guards stopped fighting and tossed away the weapons. Your Majesty, the toad tried again. But this time the Queen of Heaven cried,
Thunder God, save me from these intruders.
Thunder God began to bang his drums, and soon heaven itself was trembling with the roars of Thunder God's fury. Now Rooster began to crow with all his might, letting out the harshest, loudest sound anyone had ever heard. Terrified of this noise, Thunder God dropped his drums and covered his ears. Don't ask for my help to save you from these monsters, he said.
With that, the queen blew upon a whistle that only the hound of heaven could hear. Come save me from these intruders, she cried.
A moment later, a ferocious dog with white fur and the darkest eyes bounded toward the toad. Tiger at once set upon the dog, and the two began to fight.
But the queen, fearing for her prized dog, cried, Stop! What do you want, Uncle Toad?
Tiger, stop! The toad cried. For you see, Toad understood the queen had shown him respect by calling him uncle. Let the hound of heaven go, the toad said, and the tiger did so. The queen looked around. Her guards were weeping, scratching at their skins. Thunder God hid behind a cloud. The hound howled and whimpered.
Uncle Toad, what do you want? The queen asked again.
Please send rain to us, said the toad. Everyone on earth will die if you do not send us water. We've come to beg you.
The queen considered a few moments, and then she smiled. I will send rain, she said, if you promise that you will never travel here again. If you croak loudly, then I'll know it is time to send rain.
The toad agreed. His friends rejoiced, and they all traveled home. That evening, the rain began to fall, nourishing the land and all the creatures of earth. Ever since that day, whenever Uncle Toad croaks loud enough, rain soon follows, and everyone gives thanks to the toad for his courage and generosity to save the world. At this point in our service, we normally send the children to religious education, and we sing them out with the verse, "This will be my life." For our congregational greeting today, I want you to think back to when you were 10 years old. What major event happened in the U.S. that year? Yes, every year.
We're working on a sound problem right now, so thank you for your patience. Take a moment to check in while we look at this.
You have got a little time to reminisce and think about those memories. Our anthem today is an offering performed by Bonnie Rowe, Sadness of Soul. rented room. Certainly a nice prayer to the friend of meditation. Please find a comfortable position for this time of reflection. I'll read a prayer by Maureen for Warren. We will follow that with a minute of meditative silence. This prayer is for all who are fearful about the economy, about the fate of our country, healthcare for yourself and your children. For all whose heart aches at the injustices being done to others in our land. For all who fear for the survival of the planet. For all who fear whether they will be allowed to enter, or to leave, or to remain. We make this prayer for all who deal daily with failing health, difficult diagnoses, challenging treatments, or healthcare routines. For all who struggle with difficulties at school or work. For all who are facing hard decisions. For all who are living in challenging relationships. We make this prayer for ourselves, for all the fears and concerns, joys and celebrations. We make this prayer for the children, for their future, and for every blooming possibilities of spring. We make this prayer to hold in our hearts all the precious blessings of our lives. We make this prayer not because we expect it to make the world turn or change. We make this prayer to remind ourselves who we are, what life is, and how important life can be. We make this prayer because these words are what we need.
Our reading today is called The Smallest Big Number by Erica A. Hewitt. She writes, I serve as a pastor of a 60-member congregation in Maine, and every time I help decide whether the weather's bad enough to cancel worship, I know that someone's going to grouse. The same weather can elicit responses from, "There's hardly any snow," to, "I can't possibly clear my driveway." 60 people looking at the same roads don't just have different opinions, but also a multiplicity of perspectives. Most of the leaders I know are being forced to translate that decision-making pressure to an unknown, potentially lethal virus whose patterns we can neither predict nor fully understand as it makes its way through the country of nearly 330 million people. It's no wonder that those leaders are crumbling, not because of overblown fears of COVID-19, but because it's distressing to make decisions that have vast, nearly unimaginable consequences for the people we love. Should we ask people?
We still hold our event knowing that participants will receive soul nourishment but risk physical exposure. Should our family take this once-in-a-lifetime trip? Every should we is haunted by the ghost of what we'll wish we had known. Ethical culture leader Lois Kellerman has said that the smallest number in ethics is 2. I believe, moreover, that the most ethically driven decisions prioritize the most vulnerable members of any given community. Moral decision-making hinges not on the I and not even on the interconnected web of we, but on the most fragile strands of the web. Our communities, bless them, are beginning to absorb the lonely, painful cost of social distancing. If 2 is the smallest number in ethics, it's also the smallest seed of certainty. The way not to get lost. Because the ultimate test, when the fear and grief finally give way to clarity, will be knowing ourselves by how well we cared for one another.
Good morning. 50 years ago, a number of colleges and universities around the country canceled classes and sent students home early. Hard to imagine what kind of upheaval could have led to that one-of-a-kind situation. When I conceived of this sermon topic several months ago, I wanted to commemorate Kent State and Jackson State, but I had no idea that U.S. colleges and universities would be closed once again. Those closings 50 years ago were not due to a biological plague. Rather, they were due to a plague of fear in our country, the type of fear that is used to justify bad actions, the kind of fear that leads to bad policy and bad decisions. In late April 1970, President Nixon gave a speech outlining his plan for peace with honor in Vietnam. As a result of that speech, some people believe that the anti-war movement might lose its momentum. However, on April 30th, news broke that US aircraft were bombing North Vietnamese and Viet Cong strongholds in Cambodia. The war seemed to be spreading and escalating, and consequently, anti-war protesters returned to the streets in greater numbers. On May 1st and 2nd, protests in Kent, Ohio, led to several local businesses sustaining property damage. The ROTC building on campus was burned down. National Guard troops were called in to maintain order. When the protesters assembled again on the morning of May 4th, the Ohio National Guard was in place. The protesters taunted the guardsmen. The Guard launched tear gas canisters. A few protesters threw the tear gas back at the guardsmen. The skirmishes and violence escalated until around noon, when members of the National Guard shot and killed 4 unarmed students. 2 were protesters and 2 were bystanders. One of the dead was in the ROTC program, a tragedy and an irony. 11 days later, on May 15th, 2 African-American students were shot and killed by police officers at Jackson State College in Jackson, Mississippi. 12 other students were injured. In this case, the frustration and anger regarding the American war in Vietnam was augmented by a history of racial intimidation and harassment of African-American students in a city named in honor of one of our most racist presidents. The Jackson State tragedy is not remembered as widely as Kent State. Nevertheless, unarmed people were killed by the forces who are supposed to serve and protect. I was a 5th grader in Grinnell, Iowa at this time. My town was also the home to Grinnell College, which had a reputation for liberal views. Many students and faculty were active in the anti-war movement. I have dim memories of an anti-war protest march going past our elementary school. I assume it was after the Kent State shooting, but I don't recall the details. I do recall the unease, the anxiety, and the uncertainty about what was happening and what might happen. Following Kent State, the president and board of trustees of Grinnell College feared that civil unrest and violence would escalate. So they sent all the college students home. No more classes, no final exams, no graduation ceremony for the seniors. A number of other colleges and universities around the country closed early that spring as well. Those memories of the Vietnam conflict and the anti-war movement have been on my mind because I recently spent 3 weeks working in Ho Chi Minh City, the former Saigon, in late February and March. As I walked around the city on my free Sundays, I noticed the bustling economy and couldn't help but conclude that our military actions in Vietnam were pointless, that American political objectives probably could have been achieved by other means with less loss of life. This is not a new or novel conclusion. Nevertheless, it is a conclusion that bears remembering and repeating. Somehow, we need to try to get a glimpse of the ghost of what we'll wish we had known. I've grouped my observations from Vietnam into 3 broad lessons for today. The first lesson, I worked for a Toledo company formerly known as Libby Owens Ford, which was acquired by the UK company Pilkington, which was then acquired by the NSG Group, a flat glass company headquartered in Japan. I went to Vietnam because we were starting up a new manufacturing plant to supply the solar industry. We built the plant there because our largest customer, who is based in the US, has manufacturing plants in Vietnam and Malaysia. These 2 companies, NSG and our customer, First Solar, demonstrate the growing commercial relationships between the US and Vietnam. For better and for worse, these commercial relationships are based on US technological leadership and low employment costs in Vietnam. The co-workers that I interacted with in Vietnam were friendly, gracious people. They worked very hard. They were very good engineers. Most of them were at least 20 years younger than me, so they were born and grew up after the American War. I didn't sense any lingering animosity from them, though I would be curious to meet the parents of my coworkers. I don't think anyone 50 years ago imagined these types of corporate or personal relationships would develop between our 2 countries. Lesson 2, Ho Chi Minh City is about 30 feet above sea level on average and is near the Mekong River Delta. So there's no shortage of water, but water quality is an issue. I first visited Vietnam in 2016 with 5 other co-workers. It seemed that every day someone had a gastrointestinal issue. So I learned to be cautious. At the hotel, I drank only boiled tap water. I avoided fresh salads because they might have residual water. I avoided drinks with ice cubes. So I did my best to emulate our noble Puritan ancestors, who mostly drank weak beer because city water in 17th century England was not safe either. On my recent trip, I was ready for the water concerns. Since the weather was hot and humid every day, about 90 degrees Fahrenheit and 90% relative humidity, I always had water bottles with me. My hotel provided me with 2 disposable water bottles every day. I made note of the water coolers in our plant so that I could refill my bottles regularly. I did learn from my American and British coworkers that the salads at our hotel and at the nicer restaurants were safe, as were the drinks. In terms of bacteria levels, the water quality in Ho Chi Minh City has improved noticeably. Nevertheless, tourist books recommend against drinking tap water for lengthy periods because there are concerns about the contamination of local water supplies by industrial pollution and naturally occurring arsenic in the groundwater. I did notice that many local people drank bottled water. People on the streets, people at work, which meant there was a huge amount of single-use plastic waste. Moreover, drinks sold in plastic cups are usually put into small plastic bags, which are easier to carry on your scooter or bicycle, hence double the pollution. The plant water coolers were supplied with 5-gallon water jugs from major beverage vendors, such as Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola. Historically, Vietnam was a poor country, and the local city government didn't have the financial resources to build and maintain a reliable water system. PepsiCo and Coca-Cola have stepped in to supply safe drinking water, which they sell at prices that would be very low in the US. Relying on profit-driven entities to supply essential human needs can lead to an improved quality of life, as long as lives don't become less valued than corporate earnings. I don't mean to judge the path that Ho Chi Minh City has taken to improve their water supply, especially since we have issues closer to home that need our attention, such as Flint and the algae blooms in Lake Erie. But my observations reminded me that safe, clean drinking water is a basic human right, and that, as Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence, it is essential to our key rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Lesson 3. The US sent troops to Vietnam to prevent it from becoming a communist country, and because our leaders feared the so-called domino effect. That is, if Vietnam became a communist country, then the other countries would topple over in series to the same fate. After the US pulled out from Vietnam in 1975, the South Vietnamese government held on for a while. But in 1976, the North consolidated control over the entire country. In 1986, the communist government moved away from their 5-year centralized planning approach by instituting a series of political and economic reforms, including private ownership of industry and market-driven commerce. Since that time, Vietnam has enjoyed strong economic growth and a major decline in poverty. Ho Chi Minh City has grown to 9 million people and has many modern glass towers. There are endless city blocks of small businesses, including coffee and tea shops, mom and pop restaurants serving the national soup, pho, and the national sandwich, banh mi. There are clothing stores, hardware stores, many repair shops, banks. There are hundreds of scooters and small motorcycles at every intersection. The parking area for scooters at our plant is much bigger than the lot for cars. There's a ride-sharing company called Grab, which is similar to Uber and Lyft, with one significant difference. You can get a ride sitting on a scooter behind the driver. I stuck with the cars. I entered my destination in English using my iPhone app, and the driver saw my destination on his phone in Vietnamese. translation issue solved. My hotel was next to a multi-level urban shopping mall with a supermarket, chain stores, and American restaurants such as Starbucks, McDonald's, and Chili's. The commercial district around my hotel had many nice restaurants representing cuisines from Australia, Europe, and all over Asia. Restaurants catering to tourism and businesses. My colleagues and I found at least 4 American-style brew pubs. And I didn't plan to search for those kind of places because I didn't expect to find any. I confess that my favorite was the Pasteur Street Brewing Company because they brew a light, refreshing ale called God Water, which claims to smite your thirst. And since there were no UU churches, it seemed like the most appropriate place for Sunday lunch. However, no one warned me that if I tried to relax in the city parks after lunch, that I would be accosted by hustlers with spray bottles and toothbrushes, eager to clean my shoes for a tip. I had the cleanest shoes ever. In any case, all these private entrepreneurs and small businesses led me to think that a cooperative foreign policy based on developing commercial ties would have been a better approach than carpet bombing. There are risks to such a foreign policy. For example, this could result in exploiting foreign labor and undermining American workers. And we need to be aware that we shouldn't base our foreign policy solely on the interests and profits of American multinational companies. And of course, the government of North Vietnam was not receptive to a capitalist approach until the 80s. Nevertheless, we bear the responsibility to decide whether to bomb or whether to offer to build bridges. With the benefit of hindsight, the domino effect was an unrealized fear. Vietnam became a communist country with a government that committed some atrocities. The other Southeast Asian countries, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Malaysia, Thailand, have each gone through some level of upheaval and violence based on different combinations of religious, political, and economic tensions. But those countries did not fall sequentially. They did not become a solid block of communist-controlled countries seeking to undermine our way of life. Our fear of the domino effect led the United States to commit atrocities such as Agent Orange and napalm. Closer to home, I am sympathetic to the protesters at Kent State and Jackson State because I can imagine that they were angry, justifiably angry, at the deceptions of the president and the military leadership, angry at the injuries and death we were inflicting on the people of Vietnam, angry that we would put African American soldiers at risk in a distant country, but not respect their civil rights at home. But some of those protesters made bad decisions in the heat of anger, breaking windows, throwing stones at cars, or burning down buildings. In response to those acts of vandalism, civic leaders and store owners in Jackson and Kent were fearful of property damage, economic disruption, and violence. So government forces were brought in to protect bystanders and others, or perhaps to separate conflicting groups until emotions subsided. The guardsmen at Kent State must have felt a variety of emotions. Some of them may have felt fear. The guardsmen who shot the unarmed protesters clearly made a poor decision which had irreversible and devastating consequences. These emotions, fear and anger, are natural and normal. We need to listen when people express those emotions, and we need to acknowledge those emotions, not criticize or diminish those emotions. Conversely, we need to be careful how we respond when we feel those emotions. We need to be mindful and aware of our emotions. The first step is often to simply describe our feelings or emotional state. We don't want to let our fear and anger justify bad decisions that we will regret or that will escalate the situation. I'll close with a short reading from the Reverend Teresa Sato, because these words remind me that our UU principles may help us get to the other side of fear. In this community, we hold hope close. We don't always know what comes next, but that cannot dissuade us. We don't always know just what to do, but that will not mean that we are lost in the wilderness. We rely on the certainty beneath, the foundation of our values and ethics. Blessed be and amen.
Amen. Thank you. And now, if you'd like to join us at home, we're going to sing number 95 in the hymnal, There Is More Love Somewhere. If you don't have a hymnal at home, then I'll just announce the word right before, and you'll catch on pretty fast. We'll do all 4 verses. There's more love. There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere. There is more hope. There is more hope somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more hope somewhere. There is more peace. There is more peace somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more peace somewhere. There is more joy. There is more joy somewhere. There is more joy somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more joy somewhere. Now time for our church's offering. And we are online today, so if you would love to look at our website, you can go to uutoledo.org and go to our donate page. There's a button to pledge, and there's all types of offering options if you want to make it weekly or in one time, whatever works for you and your family. I know this is a difficult time for a lot of us, and whatever you're able to offer your church is really helpful. We're able to do good work in our community. And our offertory will be another solo by the wonderful Bonnie Rowe, Though I May Speak with Bravest Fire. Bonnie. Please join me as we dedicate this offering. We dedicate this offering to the support and good work of First Unitarian Church of Toledo in this community and in the world. And next Sunday, so our coming soon, Reverend Tim will lead our service titled Pandemic Progress Report. We do invite you also to join us at 10 a.m. We would normally have Spiritual Adventures program.
We do have a Spiritual Adventures program.
Oh!
And it is entitled Judy Murray is facilitating. Yes,
thank you, Judy. I have the wrong script, my bad. And we will have coffee hour right after this. We're really excited that we've got Zoom going with the YouTube live stream, so we can actually have a little interactive time with y'all. If you've not used Zoom before, we might spend a moment to discuss, but you join. This will be the meeting number, and then below it will ask you for a password, just as written. So that's 95609468082. We look forward to seeing y'all.
So I have these closing words from Deborah Hafner. As we enter another week of uncertainty in the world, let us remember that there is only one side, that of humanity and planet Earth. May we pray for peace. May we raise our voices with our elected officials, and may we engage as we can in acts of resistance when we see injustice. And may we remember to take very good care of ourselves, each other, and those we love.
And as we send the flame, we'll read We Are One by Amy Zucker Morgenstern. Never has it been more true than now. We extinguish this flame, but the sparks within us remain alight. From each of us in our supposed solitude, the signals buzz and hum, sparkling through space, one to the other, connecting us invisibly but palpably. We are one, and from every window, our light shines. And our recessional will be as we leave this friendly place. As we leave this friendly place, love give light to every face. May the kindness which we learn light our hearts till we return.
Thank you. Please join us for coffee hour on Zoom.